The longest I've gone without eating is 48 hours, but don't worry, you don't have to go that long without food to enjoy some of the benefits of intermittent fasting. And there are 4 things that you really need to know about intermittent fasting before we get started. Number 1, starvation mode. It's not really a thing. There's no evidence to suggest that a day or even 2 days without food is going to cause your body to start eating all of its own muscle. Number 2, because you're consuming very few calories or no calories when you're fasting, it's a pretty good way to consume fewer calories and lose weight, especially because number 3, fasting has been linked to an increase in insulin sensitivity and fat mobilization. So it may indeed be a decent way to lose fat while retaining your muscle. And number 4, it's also been linked to a reduced risk of a bunch of different diseases, including heart disease, because it appears to cause the body to eat itself. But don't worry, that's a good thing. I'm going to get into all that in just a minute, so stick around. I'm going to make you an expert in intermittent fasting. So what is intermittent fasting? Well, if you're a little bit confused by this, it is the practice of not eating intermittently. You consume very little or no calories for an extended period of time. There are 2 really popular models that most people tend to follow. There's 16-8, where you fast for 16 hours out of the day, including your sleeping hours, and you just eat during an 8-hour window. That was popularized by Martin Berkhan of leangains.com. Then there's Eat Stop Eat, which is popularized by Brad Pilon, and that is when you don't eat for 24 hours once or twice a week. There are some other models of fasting out there, like the 5-2 diet, which has you eat like 500 or 600 calories during your fast days. There's also the models where you fast for several days at a time. Some people say that's good for religious or medical reasons. But today we're just talking about these 16 to 24 hour fasts. Now, the very first response to this is that if I go a few hours or a day without eating, my body is going to eat its own muscle for fuel.
Think about it for a second from an evolution standpoint. In the absence of food, what happens is we start to burn the stored fat or fat stores instead of burning the precious muscles. We wouldn't evolve if we started burning muscle. If you think about it from a standpoint of physiology, it happens due to a hormone called as human growth hormone. Human growth hormone is a hormone which is crucial to maintenance of the muscle and the bone.
One randomized study published in 2016 actually found that obese people who are fasting every other day for 8 weeks lost the same amount of fat and retained the same amount of muscle as a control group that was consuming the same number of calories over the week. There's also evidence to suggest that fasting could increase the production of growth hormone, which might explain all this. Growth hormone helps you to lose fat while retaining muscle, and this could be because when you're fasting, you're not releasing any insulin, and insulin spikes appear to blunt the release of growth hormone, potentially. A lot of these studies on growth hormone have been done over like 3 to 5 day fasts, but there's still some evidence to suggest there's a pretty interesting effect during shorter 24-hour fasts as well. So while I would not go as far to say that fasting is anabolic, it doesn't appear to be catabolic, and it helps to mobilize fat tissue as well, according to some research, but you do have to keep your calories in check. Now, while there's decent evidence for improved fat loss when you're fasting, most of it does suggest that you're going to lose probably the same amount of fat and maintain the same amount of muscle, no matter when you consume the calories. So why would you want to go through the trouble of fasting? Well, for one, it's not that much trouble. You're just not eating. A lot of people find that more convenient than preparing a lot of meals for throughout the day. And especially because if you have all your calories at the end of the day, that can be a more filling meal. Some people find that a more enjoyable way to structure their calories. It's a very individual thing, but there are 3 other big potential benefits that you really want to think about. The first, and probably the one with the most research supporting it, is insulin sensitivity. To put things pretty simply, a lot of health problems like diabetes and metabolic syndrome have been linked to low insulin sensitivity. That can be caused by a bunch of other stuff, like not getting enough sleep, not getting enough exercise, stressing too much. But a big cause of insulin resistance, or not being sensitive to insulin, is from eating too many refined carbohydrates too frequently. That causes a lot of spikes in insulin. When you're constantly spiking your insulin, the body gets less sensitive to it and needs more and more insulin to accomplish the job of moving nutrients and sugars out of the bloodstream and into muscles and organs where they're needed. That's a bit of a simplification, but that's largely what we're talking about. And fasting, because you're not consuming anything, you're not secreting any insulin at all, so the body may become a bit more sensitive to it. And that can be good news for fat loss and for overall health as well. That said, I really need to make it clear that if you have diabetes, if you're on medication, if you have any pre-existing conditions, or basically if you're anyone at all, you should speak to your doctor before considering intermittent fasting, because for a lot of people with certain conditions, it's recommended they don't undertake it. And I am not a doctor, so definitely speak to your physician if you're thinking about it.
Insulin typically goes down during fasting, and the effect can be seen in as soon as 24 hours or so. Therefore, alternate day fasting is an acceptable technique to improve insulin sensitivity. So keeping the insulin levels low is that missing link in the weight loss puzzle.
The second thing I want to talk about here is ghrelin. That's a hormone that is linked to increased appetite. It's sometimes called hunger's timekeeper because if you eat at the same time every day, the body can get used to releasing ghrelin, to remind you that it's time to eat. For a lot of people, struggling with hormones like ghrelin can get in the way of productive weight loss. So Dr. Asta Kara has some recommendations for fasting.
It's been shown to increase appetite and it's been shown to increase weight gain. Ghrelin level has been shown to decrease with fasting. In a study, there was that patients undertook during a 33 hours fast where the ghrelin level was measured every 20 minutes and it subsequently was shown to decrease. This is why clinically we see that a lot where patients tell us that their hunger subsides as they start fasting and they don't feel hungry anymore.
Now, there's not as much research on this as there is on fasting and insulin sensitivity, but nonetheless, there is some research suggesting that ghrelin may decrease if you're fasting regularly, and that can make appetite control and weight loss easier for some people. Believe it or not, it is a good idea to eat yourself. This is the last benefit of fasting I'm talking about, but it's not eating your own muscle exactly. This is called autophagy. That refers to a process when the body eats up its own diseased and damaged cells, it takes them apart and recycles them for new parts.
Autophagy is a cellular cleaning process which gets activated in response to certain metabolic stresses, such as nutrient deprivation, such as growth factor depletion, and even low oxygen levels, hypoxia. By digesting its own parts, body does two things. First, it gets rid of unnecessary proteins that may be damaging or malfunctioning, and then it recycles the amino acids into new cellular components. What happens with fasting is these pathways are turned on or off, and then we see autophagy or cellular regeneration happen.
Autophagy is linked to a lower risk of a bunch of different health conditions, and fasting isn't the only way to stimulate it. Exercise is also a really good way to increase autophagy. It's the most research-backed. Lowering your carbohydrate intake might also help, but fasting has been linked to an increased amount of autophagy. That might be just because you're consuming fewer carbohydrates, but there's also some research linking a really big increase in autophagy, especially in the brain, among people who are fasting. That might be why it's linked to improved cognition and a lower risk of certain neurodegenerative disorders. A lot of that research, to be fair, is in rodents. Nonetheless, it's very interesting research supporting its use as a means for maintaining mental health. And there's also some evidence that weekly fasts lower the risk of heart disease. So this research is a little bit preliminary and most of it's on rodents. Nonetheless, the link between fasting and longevity is a very, very interesting one and one that warrants further exploration. Now, if you're thinking about trying intermittent fasting, I know it can seem really daunting. It's worth thinking first that a lot of the discomfort just comes from the habit of eating, which you've done every day for your entire life, as opposed to the body actually needing food. But here are some tips that Dr. Kara gives her patients.
Number 1, drink water. Start your day with water and drink plenty of water every day. Number 2, stay busy. It'll keep your mind off food. It often helps to fast on the days when you're actually busy anyway. Number 3, drink coffee. Caffeine is a mild appetite suppressant, so it helps. Number 4, ride the waves. Hunger comes in waves. And whenever you're hungry, drink some water first, very slowly. It'll subside.
Now, we're not going to say that everybody out there should start intermittent fasting because, of course, health is a very individual thing. It's up to you to figure out what practices feel right for you and which don't. Also, of course, I am not a doctor, I should say again, and there are some conditions, especially diabetes, where it may not be the best idea, so speak with your physician if you're thinking about it. For the average person though, it does appear to have some utility as a weight loss tool. You do need to make sure though that your calories are in check overall and that you don't overfeed when it is time to eat. So that's everything from me. If you want to read more and check out all my studies and become a real expert yourself, you should Google the full article for this video, BarBend, Intermittent Fasting 101.